But one thing that's really important for all people looking to get into fashion or starting their own fashion is really to be new advocates of change, of sustainable fashion, and finding ways to whether design their designs with sustainable fabrics and recyclable fabrics, because nowadays sustainability can mean just fair wages.
Welcome to The Brew. Today we're joined by Christen Montero, who is the co-founder of Blue Social, as well as the founder of CannaBoss Lifestyle. So to get started, tell us a little bit about your time abroad, because I know recently you just did a trip to London as well as other places in Europe to explore more about CannaBoss Lifestyle as well as some other events. So can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, thanks, Val. Thanks for having me here on the show today. I just got back from Paris, and last year I was awarded in London as most influential Filipina. And
congratulations.
Thank you. And when I was in Paris, I was actually there speaking on fashion sustainability and corporate social responsibility in general. And at the same time, being founder of CannaBoss Lifestyle right now, our whole mission is to help fashion designers internationally to really grow their brand in the United States market, and also be mindful of the carbon footprint that goes along with the supply chain going all the way to international countries, Europe, China, Japan. So it was really good. It was a fun adventure, definitely. Speaking and also getting to know some of the fashion designers and their struggles. It really shows that, even though there's fashion designers out there that are already, the public sees that they made it because there's celebrities wearing their clothing. Yep. At the same time, a lot of people don't realize that some of those same fashion designers are still struggling today. Yeah. And a lot of it is partially because the way that the system of the fashion industry is built right now and how it feeds into society, but also the lack of support that's needed to actually operate a retail business versus just being a fashion creative.
Yeah, and I think that's super important point that you bring up is a lot of times you see a piece of clothing where by a famous celebrity, it's worn on the red carpet, or it's worn out like on Vogue magazine or whatever. It's all over the place. It's very publicized. There's a lot of PR push. But just because that very, very expensive piece, which that celebrity most likely never even paid for because you gave it as an endorsement, doesn't mean that's going to convert into actual regular everyday person buying that piece of clothing. Yeah. And that's usually because of branding, business development, the retail stores, online web presence, all these factors that they usually don't consider. So would you say that the biggest struggle for fashion designers in general is more that they're really a creative, not a business person? Is that where you think that the kind of disconnect comes from?
Yeah, I think definitely that is a huge disconnect. And a lot of individuals, even in different types of business, think that, okay, anybody can run a business, and anybody can, but it's more to just bossing people around and telling people what to do. And a lot of times it requires a team of people. And when you want to make clothing, for example, you can only make so much being yourself. At a certain point, there's going to need to be somebody who's managing the fabric inventory to make sure that you have the fabric that you're using for your different projects, to making sure that it's the right fabric. So even doing R&D for fabric research to develop high quality products, there's a lot of work that goes into it. And a lot of times, as creatives, we don't want to spend that time doing all the research for vendoring and setting up these partnerships and filling out these forms and applications and getting this permit. And so there's even a lot of legal stuff that goes into really operating a true business in general, let alone a fashion business. A lot of times, it only goes so long just succeeding as, carrying your own brand as a fashion designer. But if you ever truly want to scale rather than just ride the hype, learning the operational side of business is crucial.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, because the one thing that I think a lot of fashion designers really don't think about is the supply chain itself. So if you're an international fashion designer and you have a piece of clothing that you make somewhere in Europe.
Yeah.
And somebody in the United States wants to buy that piece of clothing. Now you got to think of import, export. You got to think of the taxes on top of that. You have to think of if you can actually legally even ship it over. Then you have to think of how you package it, if it's going to even get there. And then once it gets there, is it even the right fit? So there's a lot of, I think, problems, but there's a lot of opportunities in that space because it is such a traditional industry. It's been around for a long time. That's why I do see that the same problems are reoccurring, because it has been a PR industry. It has been this huge push. But now it's slowly, I mean, not necessarily high-end fashion designers, but just, everyday fashion designers, very like low-end, just making, not necessarily fast fashion, but just making clothing pieces. A lot of people are using, boutique stuff like Etsy. They're using Shopify. So they're at least kind of creating an e-commerce presence. But I really don't see that on the high-end luxury side. Yeah,
so on the high-end luxury side, it's really hard to establish yourself as a brand in high-end luxury. And usually you're doing a lot more community endorsements than trying to sell retail initially. So there's a lot of issues that also happen when you're doing things on Etsy or looking to just establish a fashion company in that manner.
Yep.
Because there's also a lot of waste that goes into the fashion industry. And although it's good that we have a lot of entrepreneurs that are getting into fashion, and creating these fashion brands, I also think it's really important that we're mindful of where we're getting our fabrics and our resources and how those fabrics are being created, because right now we're dealing with the whole issue of fast fashion.
Yep.
And the fact that the fashion world is the largest polluter to waste in the entire industries of industries other than oil.
Yep.
And some people may not know that actually high-end designers rather burn their clothes in piles of clothing than sell it at a discount to a consumer, because they don't want to lose the reputation of their brand that they have of high quality. And sometimes consumers do, think of pricing and think of quality, and there is in that marketing a pricing strategy aspect to marketing in itself. But one thing that's really important for all people looking to get into fashion or starting their own fashion is really to be new advocates of change, of sustainable fashion, and finding ways to whether design their designs with sustainable fabrics and recyclable fabrics, because nowadays sustainability can mean just fair wages. And that's getting thrown a lot, and I've seen it in a lot of manufacturing plants abroad especially. And there's only very few that actually turn recycled bottles into fabrics and weaved clothing apparel that you can use. And maybe some of them, and not maybe, but actually some of them don't even create the clothing. They just create the fabric to be used to create clothing again. And I think it's really important we become really aware of that and start using those type of suppliers.
I agree, and I think that's another important point is the word sustainability. It is such a vague word. Like it's so ambiguous. It's like, what does it really mean to be sustainable? Because there's so many different areas of sustainability. So when I hear that thrown out by large corporations, it really makes me question, because you saying something doesn't mean your actions are following. And this is shown by Zara, H&M, and all of these companies, because what they do is they slap on sustainability on their stuff, but they're really taking out one process maybe in what they're doing that makes like 1% of the waste that they're pushing out, and then they're calling that sustainability. And then the consumer, when you read, they're like, all right, it's sustainable, it's cheap, I'll buy it, it looks good. But that kind of goes into the horrors of fast fashion, which is a lot of times fast fashion looks at what are the trends right now. They use algorithms to look at like, oh, these amazing, luxury pieces are created like this. All right, how do we make that super cheap and how do we mass produce it? Then they do that in a cycle, and the amount of different clothing that comes out, I don't remember if it was H&M or Zara, but they come up with like the amount of clothing lines they come up per year, it would blow your mind. Like the number is so high because they're just coming out. It was like every week they come out, well, no, every other day or something like that, they come out with a new piece of clothing because they just see the trends and then they push a certain amount of product and then they sell it out in the market. And then the consumer will buy more and more and more even though they don't need it and just wear it one time.
Right. So I think you bring up a good point that there's actually a responsibility for the consumer, ourselves, and we're all consumers. And it's really, starting to be more cautious and care about the products that we choose, to hold companies responsible to truly being sustainable from the aspect of caring about environmental sustainability and using recyclable products. You see it a lot with people who are flagging around this corporate responsible, we're corporately responsible. And, what does that mean? A lot of people are saying, oh, well, we're environmentally, conscious and friendly. Or, they say that we're increasing our corporate responsibility and this is what we're doing now. But usually a lot of times they're just tweaking one little thing in the process to be able to use that as a marketing play. It's not that it's actually in their operations or their business model. So I think that's where consumers ourselves, is encouraging companies to become more transparent about their processes operationally, and also using blockchain technology in this whole environmental, change that we're going to right now, even in this nation and in the world in general, and using that technology to keep integrity and also be able to track where these sourcings of recyclable fabrics are even coming from, because even if a company says we got these recyclable fabrics, how do we know it's truly recyclable? Or how do we know that the plant that they're getting it from is actually using clean recycled products to create this product, and not just saying that it was recycled and now it's coming into this fabric weave? Yeah,
I agree. And I think that's another important thing to think about is the word CSR. It's important. Any company needs to think about their corporate social responsibility. It's honestly part of a corporation nowadays that they need to include it in some way, shape, or form. But the question comes from, are you doing it because of good faith, or are you doing it because of profits at the end of the day? And a lot of times when I do see the word sustainability, that's when I do start questioning it. But there are some good examples of people that are using CSR, companies that are using CSR, and that's really benefiting them. For example, Adidas plans, I don't remember the exact date. It's like 2023 or might have been 2026 or 25 or whatever, that they want to make most of their clothing out of recycled materials. Same thing with a company in Finland, Filipina. Their entire approach, which I think is very, very smart, is that they are trying to do it through all plastic and renewables. However, they realize that they can't 100% make all their clothing out of it. But right now, even on their website, it says about 39% is made out of it. That's a start. And at least they're honest about it. They're saying this much recycled material is going into this is how we're building it out. And their entire brand is around that. So that's where I think it becomes legitimate when your brand pushes that image, not necessarily, I'm just going to slap it onto my brand and hopefully it catches on. But if you're authentic from the start and you're showing, because on their website, they literally show how much gallons of water they're saving, and it's in Finland, so liters of water they're saving, and how they're actually helping the environment, how much pollutants they're removing, and how much textiles and fabrics and all this kind of stuff. Having stats in front of you scares you, because when I see how much this industry actually creates pollutants, it will blow your mind. Actually, let me pull up some stats, because it's interesting to look at the numbers. So right now it says 35% of all microplastics, which is the biggest pollutants that go into our oceans, is made from textile factories and polyester. So that means that it's coming directly from the fashion industry. And that was in 2017. So that's definitely going to be a lot higher. And the issue with that is because of the trajectory of the jump in profits too. So the jump in the fashion industry profits and how fast it's growing, it's only going to cause more and more of this factor to come back into the play of sustainability, because if they're producing more and more and more, if they're not making these systems now of how they're going to be sustainable, it's literally just going to cause more pollutants. Which goes into our oceans, which causes these problems. And I always think it's funny because we ban straws, but then we don't go towards the industries where they're a real problem, not necessarily the product, but go towards the industry. Right. And that's something also, as United States citizens, a lot of us aren't truly aware of even the recycling process. Compared to other countries, we think that all plastic is recyclable even. And that was actually just a huge campaign that was done in the United States by the companies that were creating these plastics to convince consumers that plastic was actually truly recyclable and didn't destroy the planet. The truth is that even certain plastics, they're numbered, I think it's 1 through 10 or all these different categories, and a lot of the different categories of plastics truly can't still be recycled, even though we all throw all plastics into recycling. So like you said, it's not only being cautious as consumers in purchasing certain products, but holding industries liable to say, okay,
you use all of this type of chemical to create all of your product, you know, well, how about changing that entire process? Yeah, changing an entire process in a company costs more than just tweaking, you know, let's recycle all of our water now, and now it's going through, I don't know, some recycling system, and then now all the water in the company that they're washing their hands with and all that is recyclable. Now they can say they're corporately socially responsible, and that's the cheap way. But then the actual changing the process and the chemical usage, and yes, that means, you know, changing maybe an entire piece of equipment that was thousands or even millions of dollars. But if that means a completely entire impact change, you know, when we start seeing no longer any plastic bottles are even being able to be used by other smaller companies that are looking for packaging to put juices in or packaging to put in whatever, if we stop it at the source, then that's how we can truly impact and change the extremely exponential increase of climate change that's been happening because of our decisions.
Yeah, and it really does come from your own societal decisions, because at the end of the day, we ban straws, great. You go to Target, you look in your shopping cart when you leave Target, everything's in a plastic bag, everything has a plastic container, and even the whole push that we did in California where you have to pay for your plastic bags, it's 10 cents. Are you really telling me that consumers not going to decide to take bags because it's 10 cents? And a lot of those plastics are actually thicker plastic, which I know they're doing that because they want them to be reused, but are you really reusing them? Because even I can tell myself, I am not reusing them. I am going there, but I try to bring my own bag when I can. I try to have my own bag that I can just fit in all my groceries and bring it back to my house. But if I forget it, now I have plastic bags, what am I going to do with them?
Yeah, it's almost like we created that whole system forgetting that everybody's always on the go.
Yep.
It's not like we're walking around with plastic bags in our purses or our back pockets, you know, and say, oh, okay, I'm stopping at the grocery store. I knew I was going to stop at the grocery store real quick.
Yeah.
I have my own bag, you know.
Yeah.
Most of the time that's not the case. And even then they do get reused. Like I reuse mine and eventually throw away, you know, my animal feces stuff from my pets.
Yeah.
And it's still going in the trash.
Yeah.
It may get used a couple times, but it doesn't stop me from buying, you know, 10 cents when it's convenient, and it's either I have 15 pieces of different produce going into my cart and now going into a trunk that has nothing to hold them.
Yep.
You know, and so it does come back, and I'm even, you know, responsible for being more responsible, honestly, you know, and it's just also getting into new habits in ourselves because we grew up in a society and a culture where it was okay and we didn't learn all these impacts, whereas in other countries, they're more already aware, even at a younger age, teaching about recycling and things like that. And I know my nephews now, they even have taught me about some things about environmentalism, which is really nice to at least see that in the schools, but it's not holistically learned.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I mean, kind of bringing that back into like the fashion world in general, and I know this is unrealistic for a lot of people, but it should be realistic, and it comes back to your own kind of responsibility and your own decisions. But you don't necessarily need to buy a new piece of clothing every week. You don't need to consistently buy every month. Be aware that every single time you buy a piece of clothing, what is actually behind the scenes of making that piece of clothing, what happens afterwards. If you're buying a piece of clothing and wearing it once or twice, and now you're going to push it back out, you're literally creating those pollutants. And I actually do find that as very hypocritical, because I do know a lot of people that speak to being very environmentally friendly and that they're really caring about the environment and all this, but I do see them buying a new piece of clothing weekly. Right. And since that industry is the biggest pollutant, for me, it shows that your actions don't really lie with what you're saying. And I think that's really important to put people into check and realize that, look, this industry, the fast fashion world, it's great. It's great to look good all the time. It's great to have all these clothes. But think about, do you really need that piece of clothing? Is it just because it's cheap doesn't mean that you necessarily need to buy it.
Right. And definitely, I mean, we have Christmas right around the corner, and all the people that are buying all their Christmas clothes, I can tell you it's not for the summer. Yeah. And I can tell you that they're going to go shopping again before summer hits with a whole new wardrobe of clothing. I mean, I was just looking at some stats earlier, and let me find it here. So it says that we're actually the largest country that gives out secondhand clothing and exports secondhand clothing to the rest of the world.
Wow.
So I think that's huge. And I mean, we only know of Goodwill and, nonprofits and organizations that will pick up the clothing we don't want. But how many of us truly are doing that and putting it in a bag, making that phone call, or, going and dropping it off somewhere?
Yep.
Whereas we just throw it in our trash or whatever it is. And I mean, as consumers, we're not conscious of, okay, when you're done with your clothes, here's a place to drop it off, just like with your mattress. I mean, the mattress, at least when you get a new mattress, most of the time it gets picked up by the company, even if it wasn't their own mattress, because they know you definitely can't have a bunch of mattresses thrown out in the streets.
Yeah, you'll get fined.
And that kind of pollution that happens on the streets at that point has a whole transportation effect.
Yep.
So when I think of industries being responsible for their industry, the only thing I could think of is at least mattresses, taking them out of the homes when they get new ones, versus think about all of the consumer products that go into our homes, some that never leave and some that leave through the trash.
Yep.
But aren't actually recycled or even being able to be put in a landfill.
And I think that's a really, really important thing that you just brought up, which is, yes, maybe you're buying a lot of clothing. Take that next step. If you do want to buy a lot of clothing and that's the issue that you're having, and you don't want to cut that out, that's fine. That's a personal decision. Obviously, think about the effects. However, at least give it to like Goodwill or donate it out. Like, at least do that much. If you're not going to care about the first part of the process, at least care about the second part of the process. Give that to somebody else in need. Give that to somebody who's dealing with poverty. Give that to another country. Give it back to society then. At least like that's my at least take on it. If you don't want to care about the full thing, at least give it away afterwards, so that somebody else can get use from it, so that piece of clothing doesn't live for just like 2 or 3 wears and that's it. Because that's the biggest thing for me that bothers me about the industry, is just how minimally people wear clothing. It's just like, I'm gonna wear it 1 or 2 times, done.
Yeah, and I mean, there is companies, like Rent the Runway that, tried to help with that issue and the consumers wanting to buy this piece of item and then only wear it for one time. But then again, it comes back to the consumers and them truly being responsible. Because even them, as a company, they dealt with consumers who wanted the item to rent it, but then didn't even treat it with care or like their own. And if you're sharing as a community now products and sharing into a product inventory, almost share it, everyone has to see it as sharing closets with each other. And it's not just, oh, this is the company's and I'm just going to rent it because this is what I deserve to spill wine on it if I mess up, and in the end, now this is a community philosophy, and community values are really important in understanding that it's not just about this individualistic, this is mine and this is all mine because I'm renting it. Well, it may be yours temporarily, but it does belong to the community that's participating in this renting type of behavior and practice for the fashion industry. And it comes back to being aware and people truly caring as consumers of products like this, to understand, to have even respect for communities that are coming together for specific causes like these, where they share responsibility.
And I think that goes into kind of the final topic that we should talk about, which is the technology that can play a piece into the fashion world. Obviously, one of them we talked about, which is blockchain. And to kind of start with blockchain, I think it's good to kind of identify what it really is, because a lot of times when you hear the word blockchain, you're going to think of cryptocurrencies, you're going to think of Bitcoin, you're going to hear Ethereum, all these buzzwords that, I mean, it's somewhat died off, but it's still in the back of people's minds just because of that hype that was created. Even though I believe in the cryptocurrencies, that's not when I talk about blockchain. That's not my focus. My focus in blockchain is how do you create, to simplify, well, it's not really simplified, but to simplify to an extent, it's creating a ledger system that verifies 100% where it comes from, and it's a peer-to-peer network. So instead of having middle people, a bank, or anything involved in that process, we verify through each other and through a community if that transaction is legitimate or not. the reason why I think blockchain technology is so powerful when it comes to the fashion world is, one, obviously logistics. So the supply chain networks, understanding where the pieces are coming from, what we talked about. So where are the actual textile pieces coming from? Where is it getting made? How much water is being used? Is it verified that they're actually using those products inside of it? Is the product verified? And then after it's verified, how does it come to the consumer? Because if you use a blockchain system, you're actually able to track every single thing, verify it, but then you can also make your supply chain networks way more optimal, because you can use AI algorithms within your blockchain system to actually tell you how you should change your supply chain network. Where should you get your materials from? What makes the least amount of carbon footprint? How do you actually benefit society? That's why I love the concept of blockchain. Is it like right here, right now? Not necessarily. The technology is still very new, but to see how people are already using it, I think it's really going to change how a lot of industries go about CSR and sustainability.
Right. And as a company, like you said, it's really helpful because then they can set up these APIs and algorithms to track it from their vendors to their actual manufacturing operational plant, to their creative team, all the way to the market shelving. And the reason why blockchain is also crucial for the consumers to be aware and know about this, they may not care about the API and that aspect of it, but for the consumers to hold the companies accountable, it is the one way that companies can be transparent with their consumers, and consumers can say, okay, I know exactly where the t-shirt came from. It didn't come from this company that created, the design of it necessarily. It went all the way back to the source, all the way back to who actually created the weaving of the fabric that's used in this actual fashion piece. And that's the way, how consumers truly can participate, not only in blockchain, but in holding companies accountable to being environmentally conscious, using recyclable plastics. And when companies do say they're sustainable, investigate. Go find out, why are they saying that they're sustainable? How are they sustainable, really? What is it that makes them sustainable? And is it just a tweak of a couple things and it's a marketing play? Or is it truly there's something that they stand behind as a business model that they've created to help and address that aspect? Because like I said, and like you mentioned, it's cheaper to take the shortcuts and just tweak a couple things that really have no environmental impact versus changing an entire true business operational process to have a better impact on the world, which may not necessarily financially put profits out in the first even year. They might, company might go back down into debt a little bit just to change into that process and take that risk. So it's that balance of capitalism, but social responsibility at the same time. Where do we draw the line now? Because as an American society, we're huge on capitalism. We believe that the economy, takes care of itself. And if a product's made, eventually, if it's faulty, people won't buy it and it'll fall out of the market. But now the issue is that you have a lot of people, I guess, giving into the market from entrepreneurial side, but then not understanding the awareness and the vendors and the things that go into true business on the backside, because we've been so into the consumption of it that now we're consuming and then practicing just to make money versus understanding the true impact on a social level, which now we're suffering from today.
And it's super easy to do that social influence. That's the both the beauty and the kind of really evil side of social media, which is that through social influence, you can cause people to buy. So for example, Fashion Nova is really good at this. They're extremely good at this. They get Cardi B and they get a bunch of these very well-known kind of the pop celebrities of today that are very influential to a young target market. And they have them wearing the pieces of clothing, and they're easily able to convert them through ads and through messaging. They're able to convert sales. And then that's why this is cheap, this is easy to make. Now we can go through trends, algorithms, we figure out what the piece of clothing will make it really, really fast. And they don't care what you just brought about the back end of the process. They care about the consumption side. That's America, that's capitalism, that's all fine here. But it needs to be considered, because I think that's actually going to hurt companies in the long term, because the way that millennials consider their choices now is very conscious of like what's going on to an extent. I mean, obviously there's still a lot of social influence, but to an extent they're at least paying attention to stuff. And I applaud companies like Patagonia and stuff like that that really do care about sustainability, because they gave a fat donation check to give back to sustainability and recycled materials and all this kind of stuff once they made those profits. So yeah, sure, make those profits, but then give back and actually benefit society by R&D, developing these new systems, developing sustainability. Don't just hoard the cash and then make more cash. Give back to society if you're making the money from society. That's at least my point when it comes to business.
Yeah, and they're actually a really good example, because Patagonia will actually take back the products once the consumers don't want them.
Yep.
If companies start taking that kind of responsibility for the products that they put into society and giving consumers a way to give them back, and either companies take them back and recycle them, or at least take them back to help the consumers change out their products that they consume, that's another way, because then again, they can't all go to the trash.
Yep.
And then another thing that you bring up, is influencer marketing is good. But now influencers really need, I think it's really important that we encourage all influencers to be conscious of the products that they're pushing out themselves, and not to be just so money hungry. And it's the same thing even with other individuals that are public influential figures, like celebrities, like actors, even like, specific talk show hosts and things like that. Because they are influencing the masses to a certain extent, and they do have the ability to educate and reach a good amount of people. And if they instead, consider the environmental aspect of their decisions and how it impacts and trickles down even to the fashion industry and consumer industry. It's not just, okay, build your hype and building this word of mouth effect on social media to support this cause. It's truly being a person of integrity.
Yep.
And having values. And like you said, research shows now in the digital marketing world that millennials care more about the purpose of the company than what the product is. Even though we may think everyone's purchasing on Amazon, there's a lot of us that now have gone against that because of the amount of waste, and seeing it in the factories ourselves, being true witnesses to just the waste that's happening in industries like that and with companies. Choosing to be more capitalist minded without considering the social impact that they have on their local communities as well as the global economy. And I also shared this when Fiona Ma came down to the city of Riverside to talk about affordable housing. And how do we create that? Because then again, it's not about creating cheap houses to sell cheap houses. It's about quality living, quality homes, a good lifestyle. It's not just about these small, tiny, cheap made homes that we all just think, they think we want. We want to actually live in a home that feels like a home, that is quality, that is and quality in a sense of just quality material that you don't have to change out in 1 year because you chose to, buy a home that was cheap and made with cheap stuff, where you have to repaint your wall or change out an entire dishwasher because it was a cheap dishwasher.
Yeah. I mean, that's the couple things to point out from there is, one, that technology can be used for both good and bad. So for example, when I heard Amazon is going to go to 1-day shipping, a lot of people were stoked about that. I was horrified by that because I understand that means that the carbon footprint, the amount of transportation that's happening, the amount of boxes they're creating, all that kind of stuff. I mean, that's done through technology. They're creating algorithms. They're creating these things to be able to do that, which is great for Amazon. Like, that's going to make them become even more and more wealthy. But at what cost? Do you really need that piece of item the next day? Like, I know they have to do that for a competitive advantage because eventually Target will jump in and Walmart will jump in. I get it. They have to do it. But if you really think about the repercussions of that, you know how hard the workers are working in those warehouses and the distribution centers? And then you think about how much the trucks have to actually drive, and then planes. A lot of people don't consider planes. Planes are massive pollutants. Massive. And the more and more the flights are getting cheaper because of technology and how much people are transporting, that means that there's more and more. So I think a lot of what it really boils down to is think of both sides of the equation. Just because you get something cheaper, faster, there has to be something that happens here. And that's what technology is able to do.
Yep.
But I think where technology should be pushing towards is how do you keep those in check? Blockchain, I think, is great for that. Certain AI algorithms are great for that. Certain new technologies that are created are great for that. But I think that's where society needs to really understand is that technology can be used for both good and bad. And even when it's good for you as a consumer, doesn't mean it's very good for the rest of society or the global environment. To be more conscious about it and like research and actually do your due diligence as a member of society and really understand what's going on.
Right. And we all are preaching about this right now, but it comes back to practicing.
Yep.
And, even something as simple as compost, and just changing the habit of what we're used to on that daily basis of buying this fashion piece, like we said. And what about clean vehicle transportation? I think City of Riverside has moved towards having all of their public buses, clean energy now.
Yep.
So even companies that are involving logistic transportation, maybe start considering, even if as an entrepreneur, if it's anything that involves a car, consider using a clean vehicle, an all-electric vehicle, or setting up a supply chain that lowers the carbon footprint. That may seem an easier process, but a lot more pollution.
Yeah. I mean, to defend Amazon, these large companies, which I'm not really trying to defend, but on their own benefit, a lot of their R&D budget does go towards supply chain systems that are using more renewables and electric vehicles and stuff like that. I'm sure they did a cost analysis on that to figure out what is the R&D cost compared to the benefit they're getting from it. I mean, they have to do that. That's a business. However, at least they're doing something.
Right.
But it just still doesn't matter because the amount of usage is still massive. Like electric vehicles still have batteries. That still creates pollutants. Like there's still problems even with renewables that aren't talked about enough, which I get why they try to kind of hide it because we still need to move away from oil. I get it. It's a huge transition, but there are still pollutants in those areas as well.
Right.
So I think it just needs to be more of an honest conversation, and people need to be willing to listen and be more open-minded about it. Because when it comes to like the political stage, it goes one way or the other, and they're trying to turn it and twist it, and you hear it on the news and all that kind of stuff. I think it really comes down to the individual. Do your research, look at what's going on, look at how you can help. Even if it's the minor things you're changing around, that's a good start. But going back to the industries that really matter, look at your way that you're approaching the fashion industry, look at how you're looking at supply chain logistics and buying stuff off Amazon and e-commerce and all these things, and then make your judgments based off of that.
And the progress is a process. So like you mentioned earlier, one of the most successful companies, 39% is renewables. Right now, no one's 100% sustainable. We're still creating the infrastructure to have a more corporately social responsible economy even. So like you said, just going back and making sure we all do our research and staying informed, and even to the extent of being aware of the things that we read online and the sources even too, because a lot of people they don't teach that in high school about credible sourcing, really, and understanding truly what it means to read something where someone just wrote it up and put it online versus there's actual factual research behind what's being stated.
And it's been checked.
And has been verified and checked,
Actually, verified's a better word. Checked doesn't really mean anything. Verified. It needs to be verified. But to kind of close this out, what would your final piece of advice be to any entrepreneur that's trying to make a business and does care about sustainability?
Yeah, so I would definitely consider the social, environmental aspect. That being said, closing the gap between skill sets to help people to grow themselves and have newer opportunities within your company and creating those opportunities, but also looking at the different processes and operations. And there's different ways to be corporately, socially responsible and environmentally sustainable, and also using renewable energy and recycled products to create your new product or even a service. So whether it's a product or a service at the end, environmental sustainability, corporate social responsibility, all of that can be implemented in all the way down the chain, from how you deal with people to how you get something from overseas to how you get what you're giving to your customer base and to your market, and to just be really aware of that. And all I ask is for entrepreneurs, money doesn't bring happiness. And so to keep in mind that we care about the future of our generations and our community and how our businesses impact our community is huge and important, because that's something that wasn't considered before. It was just more of this money hungry mindset, but now it's time to think about community.
Yeah, and I honestly could not say that any better. The only thing I would add on to that is usually if you look at the way that your business is operating, you can probably find a way that you're making waste. That waste is an opportunity to actually make more profits or more sustainability or more benefit your business. So look at those things. Audit your current business, or if you're trying to build a business, look at where you're building waste and actually trying to make opportunities out of that, because you'd be surprised that actually might make your business even better.
Yeah.
But thank you so much for being on The Brew, and
thank
that's a
you,
wrap.
Val. Thanks.